Hola, bienvenidos a todos y todas a la Cumbre Virtual de Geometría Sagrada, la estructura de la realidad. Mi nombre es Juan Pablo Uribe, organizador de esta cumbre, y estoy muy feliz de presentarles a la expositora que tengo hoy día. Y les presento a nuestra queridísima Lydia Gian de León. Lydia es doctora en fisiología, arquitectura, coach de bienestar y tiene una maestría en sostenibilidad. Durante 15 años ha investigado la relación de los templos antiguos y su ubicación y es coautora del libro El poder de la ubicación sagrada. Descubre los vínculos misteriosos entre los campos de la Tierra, los templos antiguos y cómo mejorar tu salud. Es creadora de Healing Architecture y cofundadora de Geophilia. Su trabajo se enfoca en la relación de los edificios con la salud y el bienestar. Muy bienvenida a esta cumbre. Muchísimas gracias, Lydia, de aquí desde Chile para el mundo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Muchas
Welcome
gracias.
to everyone.
Y entonces vamos a decirle a la gente, vamos a empezar a hacer algunas preguntas a Lydia. Y esta es la pregunta que siempre hago a muchas.
We're going to start with the questions, and this is the question that I always make to everyone.
¿Cómo llegaste a la geometría sagrada? ¿Y qué es para ti esto de que hablamos tanto de la geometría sagrada?
How do you get to sacred geometry, and what is sacred geometry?
Well, my passion has been since I was very young with temples. And I was always fascinated by temples. I am from Greece, and I grew up in an environment, in Greece, everywhere you go around, there are ancient temples. And there is something that drew me to the temples that made me feel that it's not just an archaeological site, and it's not just what they're telling me that they were made for. So I always felt that there's so much more to it. And from there, I went deeper and I started looking into geodesy. So geodesy is something that we have a lot in ancient Greece. There is around the world, but in Greece, it's something very particular. So if you put the location of the temples around the map of Greece, you will see that they form triangles, and they have very specific geometries in between them. So that made me feel that there is something far more to it. And why would they place them in the way that in between them they have this sacred geometry? And then, of course, the temples themselves were built with all these fire ratios and these special proportions. And that made me have more questions. And then I started looking also into their location and why they're placed in particular areas. And from there, I studied architecture. I was also studying in parallel, more alternative things around architecture, how a space can be healing. That's something that I was always interested in. And then eventually that always partly leads to sacred geometry, because it's an integral part of architectural design if we want to design something for healing. So that's kind of my trip. And then I ended up doing this PhD combining biomedicine, architecture, and geophysics. So this actually comes together in an ancient temple, which we will talk about more today. What is sacred geometry to me? I think the way I feel it outside of the science and all the knowledge around it, I feel it's just the language of the universe. And I think it's the way the universe creates in such a way that it keeps everything together. It's like the glue that keeps everything together in different scales. So that's the way I feel about it.
Es muy bonita tu expresión de este pegamento, porque nos hace ver no solo aquellos que hemos ido a algún templo sagrado,
It's very beautiful, the expression that you use, this idea of glue, because it allows us to see not only to the ones that have been to sacred temples,
sino que su relación geográfica con otros templos.
but also
Y,
geographical relation to other temples.
y eso es algo que se nos escapa de la vista. Es como que creemos que la geometría solo está dentro del templo, pero no vemos la geometría en relación al contexto que lo rodea. ¿Crees tú que es muy importante ver ese espacio relacional en la arquitectura para poder entender los templos antiguos?
This is something that we pretty much forget to see, because we're always putting attention to what's inside the temple, but we don't really study it in relation to its context. Do you think it's important to put attention to the relational context of the space, this architecture, in order to understand sacred geometry?
Well, I think sacred geometry is something that exists in the universe and in nature in all scales. So we find it in a very small scale, we find it in the medium scale, which is our human body. It's built with all these like sacred proportions. And then we go in bigger scales in the Earth proportions, in the solar system, and then even further in the galaxies. So looking at the temple, I think only in one scale regarding its sacred geometry is just one part of the puzzle. And also you can look a temple at its big dimensions and you will find a basic proportion. And then, for example, if you take, I don't know, the ancient Greek temples or the Mexican pyramids, and you go more in detail and you zoom in some specific proportions of some of its parts, then you see other kind of sacred geometry. And in the same context, you can zoom out of the scale of the particular temple and then start seeing what is its proportions or its relations to other temples. So for example, there is an interesting thing that I can mention about Greece. We have three very important temples. One is Dodoni, Delos, and Delphi. These three temples were all of them oracle centers and healing centers. And they are both, all of them built in the same line, and they differ each other just 1 degree in the latitude. So it's 39, 38, 37. So there are a lot of complex things. And then if you extend that line, you find other temples, you go to UK, you go to Egypt. And this is not only Greece. I mean, in Greece, it's just, it has been studied a lot. And that's why we have even the name of geodesy. But all around the world, I think what the ancient civilizations, higher civilizations that we are today, in my belief, they had a very advanced system of building these temples. And of course, they created it because it was very important to make these temples. And we can talk about that later, of course. But I think the more we can explore that and zoom out and go in the global scale, we will find incredible like exactness in proportions and in relations and in geodesy also. And I think the reason for that is we just want to have like a global system of temples that is like a grid that activated, you know, in ancient times they were all activated. And what I mean by that is that they were in use. They were complete. So they were in use and they were activated through the rituals and meditations and the energy of people. So all these active points, all alive, they will just bring a beautiful grid around the planet, just transferring all this beautiful energy and information.
Mira, precioso. Porque de alguna manera nos haces ver que estos templos pueden ser reactivados con el conocimiento que está floreciendo en estos momentos. O sea, que nosotros de alguna manera virtualmente estamos usándolos y están completos porque le damos esa característica de funcionamiento. Funcionan para una nueva conciencia que viene.
That's beautiful. From one point of view, it is as if these temples, you're telling us that these temples could be reactivated with this knowledge that's flourishing nowadays, and we're virtually using them and they become complete because they function for the new purposes and the evolution of this new consciousness.
Absolutely, and I think slowly that's where we're heading to, and that's part of my mission, let's say, me being here and sharing this message. I think it's so important to help people remember and reawaken this ancient wisdom that we all have, but we have forgotten. For me, let's say the intention of sacredness, going to a temple, is one of the most important things. Unfortunately, people today, because we don't have the right information, most people go to these places such as, pyramids or ancient temples in Greece or anywhere around the world, mostly like archaeological ruins. Oh, let's see how people in other times were designing something. Well, it was prehistoric and they didn't have good technology. Versus this was a sacred place, and I should go with my best intention and with my most sacred approach to that being that is called a temple. I think we are seeing it slowly, but we will see more of that, I think, in the next years to come. People wanting to make new temples and using the ancient knowledge, not just building anywhere, designing with whatever way, and kind of recreating that grid that we have lost. And of course, the ancient temples can be reactivated. It's just that we cannot, let's say, complete them today because most of them are considered protected by the archaeological authorities. So it's not like you can go and redo them so you can have the whole temple again. But of course, the energy is there, and with the proper intention and also with groups that do that. For example, we did that 2 years ago with Nassim Haramein. We went around, I don't even remember how many pyramids around Mexico. We were around 100 people, and we were chanting and meditating and activating every temple that we went. So that's something that people can do around the world, even they are in groups or not. Of course, in a group, it's even more powerful. But even one person going with this intention and bringing this sacredness back, it can help reactivate all these beautiful beings around the world.
Muy lindo, muy lindo. ¿Y por qué? Mira, hay gente que habla de que los templos fueron puestos en lugares de poder, ¿no? Eligieron localidades específicas. ¿Cómo podrías tú definir un lugar de poder, una específica lugar donde yo pueda construir un templo, entre comillas?
There are people that talk about the fact that temples were built in powerful or power places, very specific places, locations that were selected for those purposes. How can you define this power place where which you would build these temples?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's exactly the question I had many years ago. And because I couldn't find a good scientific answer that at least could fulfill me, I ended up doing a PhD on it to just find the answer I was looking. So I really found fascinating things, at least for me. I started selecting different temples, not just in Greece, also megalithic temples in Europe, pyramids in Mexico, just different temples around the world. And I found that almost all of them that I searched on, they all were placed in what is called a geophysical anomaly. What is that? It's a fancy scientific word, I know, but I will just break it down for you. It's a place, basically, where is there an intense shift in the value of the various fields of the Earth. So we have the geomagnetic field, we have a gravity field, we have electromagnetic fields, we have gamma radiation and other things. So in these areas, if we do a measurement there, we will see that there is a drop or an increase, it doesn't matter. And that makes a geophysical anomaly. So these places are always put in locations that have that. And how do these geophysical anomalies occur? One of the most frequent ones I've seen with temples, and there is another reason to that that I will explain, is underground water. So when you have water running underground, the friction it creates with the rock actually makes the water charged positively and the rock negatively. So that creates an electric field. And that electric field by itself superimposes on the Earth's field and creates an electromagnetic anomaly. Other than that, we already know, because I always like to combine science and spirituality, this is the work I like to do. We know that water is an element that is very subtle, and we know all ancient temples wanted this subtle energy close to them for the work they were doing. So it makes absolute sense from both sides that they would place these buildings over water. For example, they did a tomography, an electric tomography on Chichen Itza 2015, and they found that it's built exactly over a cenote. So that's fascinating to me, because building over a body of water will make the building very unstable. You wouldn't want that, but they wanted to harness that electromagnetic energy. The same goes with Delphi in Greece. The main temple of Apollo is built exactly over an underground stream of water. So that's a very common one. Another one is faults, so seismic faults. This is something that is measurable in geophysics. We already know that when there is a fault, we have this discontinuity in the rock underground, and that creates another type of anomaly. So we have, again, we can have gravity and magnetic anomalies as well. And then there are other ones, which is more technical, but these are the two main ones that I have seen in most temples. And a common question I have is, how did they know? And I'm not sure to reply to that scientifically speaking, but I have a few possible answers to that. One is that in ancient times, the Earth's magnetic field was far more intense. And because also there was no EMF pollution, people could pick it up easily. That's something that I incorporated in my research, because as humans, we are made 60% out of water, which makes us very conductive. We have iron in our blood, and then we have magnetite crystals in our brain and in the area of the ethmoid in the nose and in the ears. And there are other things, like all the nervous system works with electrical signals in our body. So we are made to be an antenna. Like our physiology is made to interact with electromagnetic fields. So for me, I wouldn't consider this, especially in ancient times, something that is supernatural. I think we're just built like that, like animals and birds use magnetic field for navigation, and it's not something, you know, psychic. I think today we have lost that for many reasons, one of them being the pollution that we have. Another possible answer to that is that these civilizations had some type of technology more advanced than we know today, and they were just able to find these places somehow. And I'm saying that because I'm convinced that they were more advanced technologically as well as in consciousness, because we today, with all the technology we have, the 3D printing, we cannot recreate the ancient temples. It has been tried and it cannot be done.
O sea, eso me trae a la siguiente pregunta, que creo que te la dicen siempre, ¿no? ¿Cómo se construyeron? ¿Y cuál es el material que especialmente usaron para construir esto?
So this brings me to the next question, which I'm sure you're asked about a lot. How were these temples built, and what specific materials were used for these buildings?
Well, again, I cannot have a complete answer to that I can back up scientifically. My opinion up to now, the research I've seen up to now, is that I think they had other types of technology. I think they used sound for levitation to carry these huge stones, because the interesting thing is that in almost all sites around the world, they never use the local stone, which doesn't make sense. I mean, in terms of resources and let's say labor, it's far more difficult to carry these huge stones for Stonehenge, for example, or for Giza from miles and miles away, instead of just harvesting the local thing. Why is that? Is because they wanted specific properties for the stone. And there is no one material that is used in temples around the world, although there are some that are more oftenly found, but there are common characteristics. And the number one characteristic that is worldwide seen in temples is conductivity. They wanted to use materials that were high magnetite, that they were had a high percentage of granite many times, but they were able to conduct electricity. And of course, that goes perfectly well with the fact that the temple, in one side, it's made to have a connection with the earth and harvest the earth radiation as its battery, as its power source. So in order to amplify that field in the temple, they needed to use very conductive materials. Regarding their construction, so one option is that they had very advanced technology that we are not aware today. There are stones that are laser cut and have precision that we cannot even do today with 3D printing. I will give you an example about the Parthenon. Some years ago, they disassembled one of the columns, and every column in the Parthenon is made of discs. So there is another disc and another, and they're just built one top of the other, huge, and they weigh some tons. So they disassembled because they wanted to recreate some of them with 3D printing. And when they opened these, for example, these two pieces that were together, let's say, linked with a copper junction, they found out that this copper junction had no oxidation. And why is that important? It means that after all these thousands of years, in between these two discs, there has never been any air. And that means that these stones were perfectly put together. Now, they tried to do the same with 3D printing. They put the two discs together and they didn't fit as well as the original, which is incredible. How did they do it? I don't know exactly. Now, there is another theory that I have looked into it, and it's a valid one, and maybe some of the temples were built like that, which is the geopolymer, which is basically that they had a technique that they could melt stone and they just use it like a liquid stone and then fit it into a particular size that they wanted, and then they could have the level of precision that we can see. But I think there is far more to it that we know and we can imagine with the awareness we have today.
Y yo lo que veo acá es, hay una pregunta: ¿por qué crees que estas antiguas civilizaciones invirtieron tanto tiempo, tanta energía y tantos recursos para construir estas estructuras? A veces eran construidas literalmente a través de siglos. ¿Por qué?
So what I'm seeing here, and this is the question, why do you think that our ancestral civilizations spent so much time, energy, and resources in building these structures? Why?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it's one that has troubled me for many years, and now I'm happy that I can offer some answers to that. So looking through all of the scientific research around temples, what I realized is that they were not just built for religious purposes. And that makes sense to me, because what civilization will just spend tons of like money and resources and energy and time to build huge structures if it was just for religious purposes? It just doesn't make sense. Civilizations always invest in something, and especially when they invest so much, when it's something that is the most important for them because it serves them in many ways. So what I found out is there are a few reasons and a few different functions that temples carried out, and they're a multi-complex organism at the end. The first function that is clear to me after all these years is the healing aspect, and that I'm not saying it just theoretically. I will just give you a short, let's say, summary of that, which is there is a phenomenon in science which is called hormesis. And that phenomenon is seen in almost everything, and I will explain. What this phenomenon says, any agent can be, let's say, helpful or not helpful, and it depends on the dosage and the time exposure. So fasting or diet is good, but if you overdo it, it will be bad. Exercise, the same. They did scientific research and they found if you overdo exercise, it will have negative effects. This is also seen in drugs and pharmaceuticals. It's seen in homeopathy, and they basically found out from that short-term stress, any kind of stress, emotional stress, electromagnetic stress, whatever kind of stress, which is fasting is a stress, for example, and exercise is a stress. Short term, for a low dosage, it can actually create healing. The opposite is also true. Long-term stress will create disease. So I realized from that the temple offers, in terms of electromagnetics, it's a stress, because it has a big anomaly there that is amplified through the body of the temple, and also there comes sacred geometry, where all these proportions and shapes actually structure the field. The same way we know now that, for example, vortexing water will change the water structure. So what sacred geometry did is, apart from other functions, it's basically structured that field to create it, to make it very harmonic. And then we had the sky connection. So we have the earth for power, the power source. We have the building body, which is made of sacred geometry and conductive materials. And also it's built according to sacred dimensions based on the plank, which is what Arturo explained before. And then we have the sky connection, which is that temples were very much aligned with celestial events. So that's like a powerhouse of earth and cosmic radiation. So you would enter there and you would be exposed to a great electromagnetic stress. And in my opinion, that was used for healing. And that's why there are tons of writings around the world. In Greece, we have the temples of Asclepios, where people were invited to sleep for one night in the temple, and then there's tons of writings saying that they woke up and they were healed. Some they were blind and then they could see. And the way they write it is that they had to make let's say, a prayer to the god Asclepios and ask for healing. And then that therapeutic night, the god will come in their dreams, and then the next morning they were healed. And of course, I believe, in energy healing, and the dream therapy is incredible. But imagine if all that happens in this kind of bioresonance device in a huge scale, which was the temple. So that was one part. Another part that is really important is the altered states of consciousness. And what do I mean by that? There is a lot of research that is showing that the frequencies that are found in ancient temples, when they are applied to the human brain, they create altered states of consciousness or mystical experiences, or whatever you want to call them. But basically, we have the frontal lobe here that gets activated by these frequencies, and also most people turn to their right brain dominance, which is more intuition and creativity. We already know what the right brain means. So what could be more important if you're looking for answers and you want to connect with your higher consciousness? Having a device like a temple that allows you to access that. That is invaluable. So first, you do it for the health of the people. So you have an investment for the people's health. Second, you can access altered states. So you can have the best answers, you can find solutions, and you can have guidance on the things you need to do. And the third, and it's so important because we're also physical beings, is food. So if you have people that are healthy and they're connected to higher consciousness, they need food. So other research that I have put together shows that in many ancient temples, there were found seeds, a lot of seeds, especially around the pyramids in Latin America and also in megalithic temples in Europe. And okay, someone can say they were brought there to be blessed and all these things, and I accept that part as well. But it has been shown that when these seeds were actually placed on top of a pyramid for a short amount of time, because when they were put for a long time, they were destroyed. So for a short amount of time, they produced 200 to 300 times more yield, and the plant was more healthy. So that allowed people to have more crops and more food for the people, and better kind of food. And that has also been recreated today with modern technology. And we have now the devices that you can just half a minute or a minute place your seeds there, and then you can have far more yield and have better health plants. And the last part is energy generation. So this concentration of energy that happen in temples, in a lot of them, especially the ones that have a pyramidal shape, like the Pyramid of Giza, that in my opinion was not used internally. That's why you don't have carvings and you don't have like an interior of a temple. In my opinion, it was used like a power plant. There is research now by Russian physicists that actually prove that the shape and the material and everything was just concentrating energy. And it's interesting because the internal layer of the pyramid is made by a conductive stone, and then externally it had another short layer that is insulating. So that makes me feel that they wanted to concentrate the energy inside, and the only place it was allowed to kind of go out was the top, and the top supposedly had a gold like a gold finish. And there are a lot of writings that say that the pyramid, with that amount of concentration of energy and the insulating material, it would glow from the top. And I think, you know, if you have your health and you have access to higher states and you have food and you have energy, you are, you know, a civilization that is thriving. So this is kind of the summary of my findings until now, and maybe there is more functions of temples, but this is what I have found from my own research until now.
Maravilloso tu trabajo. Quiero honrar el trabajo que estás haciendo porque las 4 razones tan importantes tienen que volver a recuperarse. Tienen que volver a recuperarse, Lydia. Estás haciendo un trabajo precioso en ese sentido. Te doy las gracias, de verdad. De verdad que te doy las gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Porque siento que la gente tiene que entender que estamos en un periodo de vida donde necesitamos recuperar este conocimiento. ¿Tú crees que es importante en estos momentos recuperar este conocimiento? ¿Y en qué medida podría cambiar nuestra perspectiva de vida a nivel mundial?
Thank you so much, Lydia, for this beautiful work that you're doing. I honor the work that you're doing. These 4 reasons that you've mentioned, they have to come back. We have to recover them. So thank you again. I feel that people must understand that we are in a period of life where this type of knowledge must be recovered. Do you think that we need to recover this knowledge for these reasons, and what type of future could we build with that?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I am trying to do, and we are trying to do in this call, and more people around the world getting together and trying to bring everything back for humanity and for the planet. And I think now more than ever is the time to make it happen, because we are going through times that are very challenging, and there are times that are pushing us go back to the sacredness that I started talking about in the beginning. And sacredness doesn't only come in life by visiting or constructing temples. That's of course a result of having that. But sacredness comes in the way you talk to your family and your friends every day, in the way you eat and you take nourishment from the earth and you give thanks for that, in the way you work, any type of work you do, and in the way you talk to a stranger on the street, and of course it has an effect in so many other things, the way we treat the planet, the way we treat ourselves. In general, I think it's something we have gone away from, and what we're living is like the result of this. So I think reconnecting with that sacredness can help us immensely. And of course, the way we build and we create our spaces, it's something that has an amazing influence on us, because basically we live more than 90% of our times daily inside buildings. And maybe you have heard about epigenetics, but what that showed is that the environment is the one that can, let's say, push to turn on or off genes, and the environment inside our bodies, like all the fluid and all the fields that we have around, and that is managed by our emotions and our frequency. The same happens when we are in a building. So we are one colony of cells sitting on this environment, and whatever that environment meets, it has artificial electromagnetic fields, it has colors that are disharmonic, it has geometries that are, let's say, not the most beneficial, all these things. And on the contrary, it has a very harmonic design with sacred geometry, with natural materials. We receive that all day, just being in this environment. So, of course, I think it's really important for everyone, no matter what your background or your spirituality or your beliefs are, to always have a little space in every house or in every office, or it doesn't matter where you're at, that is just a little sacred place that can just automatically, without thinking, help us reconnect to that sacred part of ourselves and of life and of the universe. And that can be very simple. It can be just a few crystals and a few flowers, a beautiful image, a geometry, whatever you connect with. But I think that's a little action for everyone that can just start changing our everyday life, just looking at it and not even having to do something as a specific action. I'm not talking about meditation. Of course, if you do that, even better. But if you're just starting, start with that. Make a little sacred space for yourself.
Construir tu templo al alcance de tus manos, ¿no? Ha sido una clase espectacular, Lydia. Muchas, muchas gracias.
So this is building your own temple with what's reachable to you, with it's at hand. This has been a spectacular class. Thank you so much, Lydia.
Y de verdad...
Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Lydia. Y de verdad sigo honrando cómo nos recuerdas lo sagrado. Y una de las palabras que han salido mucho durante todos los ponentes en esta cumbre ha sido la recuperación de lo sagrado. Y que es esta conexión coherente con los espacios, con lo infinitamente grande y lo infinitamente pequeño.
So I honor again what you've said and how you remind us of the sacredness. There's a word that has come out quite often throughout this summit, talking to the speakers, which is this idea of recovering this sacredness, this connection, coherent connection with what's within and outside as well.
Un agradecimiento muy grande.
Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Es un placer.
Gracias, Lydia. Y hablas perfecto español, ¿eh? Así que, muy bien. Muy bien.
Gracias.
Bueno, hemos llegado al final de esta conversación. Fue un agrado para mí y estoy seguro que para todas las personas que están participando en esta cumbre también fue maravilloso escucharte hablar sobre estos temas tan inmensamente interesantes. Recuerden dejar los comentarios en la plataforma y también en las redes sociales. Me pueden encontrar en Instagram como @jpuribe_biogeometría y nos vemos en otro encuentro en la cumbre. Gracias.